everyone. We're back again with another insightful session for all of you. I am Manish Krishnan, Head of Marketing here at QKS Group, and I welcome you all to today's session on retail AI transformation, from pilot to P&L impact at scale. Well, once again, thank you all for joining us. Over the past few weeks, through our AI transformation webinar series, we've explored how organizations across industries can move from AI experimentation to enterprise scale adoption by building the right operating models. Not just models, but in fact governance frameworks and data foundation. Well, today we are bringing the conversation into the retail industry, where the focus is no longer on launching AI pilots, but rather it's on delivering measurable business and financial impact. While many retailers have invested in AI across merchandising, supply chain, customer experience, and store operations, relatively few have successfully scaled their initiatives into capabilities that consistently improves revenue, margins, and operational efficiency. In today's session, we'll explore why many retail AI initiatives stall and what distinguishes organizations that successfully operationalize AI, and how retailers can build the governance, operating models, and organizational readiness needed to move from pilots to measurable P&L impact. I'm delighted to introduce our speakers for today. We have Umang Thakur, Vice President and Principal Advisor. We have Aaron Andrews, Associate Director and Principal Advisor. Together, they will share practical insights from enterprise research, executive advisory engagement, and real-world retail transformation initiatives to help organizations accelerate AI adoption with confidence. One reminder that I have for all our attendees that are joining us live today is that you are all eligible for a complimentary AI readiness benchmarking and advisory workshop, where you'll receive personalized maturity insights and recommendations that help you shape your AI transformation journey. So stay tuned towards the end. And with that, let's get started, and over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Anish. Hello, everyone. The theme for today's webinar is From Pilot to P&L Impact at Scale. It's a challenge many retail leaders are facing today. So most of the retailers have already started their AI journey. They run pilots, test different use cases, and seen some good early results. But the real question to answer is, how do you turn those pilots into real business value? Today, we'll first look at where the retail industry stands and why many AI investments still aren't delivering the results retailers expected. We'll talk about two major challenges, the adoption gap and the execution gap, and what's stopping retailers from scaling AI across the business. After that, we'll look at what it takes to make AI part of everyday retail operations, the key questions leaders should be asking, and finally, we'll wrap up by showing how the QKS Enterprise Transformation Framework helps retailers move from AI experiments to real business and P&L impact. Right, thanks, Anish. So let's start by looking at the current state of AI in retail. So, over the last couple of years, what we've seen is we've seen a significant shift in AI spending. We have seen Gen AI expanding rapidly. Most retailers are running multiple AI pilots across different parts of the business. And there is also a much stronger focus on using AI to improve business outcomes than ever before. So from an investment and innovation perspective, the momentum is clearly there. But when we look at what happens after those pilots, the picture completely changes. Many organizations still have far more pilots in production deployments. User adoption remains lower than expected. And it's mainly because AI isn't fully integrated into everyday work. And then there are different teams often building similar solutions, creating duplicate efforts, and leading to a fragmented AI landscape. And despite all the investments, many organizations are still struggling to demonstrate a meaningful return on their investment. So that is the reason why this conversation is so important. We believe that the challenge today isn't convincing retailers to invest in AI. That is already done. The real question retailers are asking today are, how do we turn our AI investments into real business value? How do we move beyond isolated pilots and scale AI across the business? And how do we make AI part of everyday decision-making rather than just another standalone initiative?
Well, that really leads over to what we've identified as this adoption gap. And many people are used to ask the question when we're talking about AI is, can AI actually work for us? This is back when AI was still brand new and still being, they're trying to feel it out to see what can it really do. So that question often led to, can it really work for us? Real business outcomes. Now that's rarely the question. Most organizations have already run pilots and they've tested some use cases and they've seen enough success to know that, wait a minute, there's really some potential here. What's interesting is that even with all of this activity, many retailers aren't seeing the level of business impact that they have expected. And that's really what this adoption gap is about. And what we found is there are several challenges here. And the first challenge is that AI adoption has moved faster than the business value. Retailers are investing in experimenting and launching new initiatives across the business, but many are still stuck in what I call the pilot phase. There are no shortage of AI projects. The question is whether those projects are consistently moving the needle on business performance. And the second challenge is that a lot of organizations are still approaching AI from the technology side first. Yes, it's understandable because AI is a technology, but they start with a new model, they start with a new tool, a new capability, and then look somewhere to use it. And the retailers are getting the best results. They tend to reverse that process. And what we're seeing is that they start with a business problem that they're trying to solve, understand the challenges, and they're looking to see, can we improve margins? Can we reduce our inventory costs? Can we increase our forecast accuracy? And then ask, where can AI help us? And that shift is really making a huge difference. And the third challenge is the number of isolated pilots we're seeing. Often different teams pursue AI independently. And honestly, each initiative can be successful on its own. But when merchandising, supply chain, marketing, customer service, all these different teams are moving in different directions, the organization can end up optimizing individual functions without improving the overall enterprise performance. And then the fourth challenge is measurement. Many AI programs are still evaluated through technical metrics for things like model accuracy or response quality, or maybe even adoption rates. Yes, they're still useful indicators, but executives ultimately want to know something much simpler. Did this improve our revenue? Did it improve our margins? Did it reduce costs or improve productivity? And if you can't connect AI to these business KPIs, it's very hard to justify scaling it. And then this fifth challenge is the operating model and the governance. In many organizations, ownership is spread across multiple teams. Priorities aren't always aligned, and there's no consistent framework for deciding what gets funded, how it's measured, and how initiatives are going to scale. As a result, companies keep adding more pilots instead of embedding AI into the way the business actually runs. When you take a step back and you look at all 5 of these challenges together, there's this pattern that emerges. And retailers really don't have an experimentation problem anymore. We've already touched on that. These pilots are everywhere. They're actually pretty good at experimentation, but what many are struggling with is turning those experiments into repeatable enterprise-wide business outcomes. And that's where the next part of the conversation becomes really important. This is where we've identified this execution gap. We talked about the adoption gap, and now we're at this execution gap. And if the adoption gap explains why organizations struggle to create value from AI investments, the execution gap helps explain where those initiatives begin to break down once teams attempt to operationalize them. And as we've worked with different retailers, we've seen these barriers tend to fall into 3 categories. Starting on the left, you'll see there's strategic barriers, then technology barriers, and operational barriers. And that's what's interesting, is that very few organizations struggle in just one area. More often than not, it's an issue across all 3. But let's start with the strategic barriers here. One of the first things we see is the lack of clarity around the business problem that's being solved. Teams get excited about AI capabilities, but there's no clear connection to a business outcome that leaders actually care about. When that's the case, it's difficult to prioritize investments and even harder to define what success looks like. Another common issue is executive ownership. If AI is viewed as primarily as an IT maybe an analytics or a data science initiative, it often struggles to gain momentum. The organizations making the most progress are the ones where business leaders are actively championing the effort and holding teams accountable for the outcomes. And then there's measurement. If success isn't defined up front, every conversation about AI value becomes subjective. People are just guessing of what they're doing, and they're not seeing what are we holding this AI up against. And teams may feel like they're making progress, but without clear metrics is tied to the business performance, well, then proving your ROI really becomes a challenge. Now, once those strategic pieces are in place, attention typically shifts to the technology barriers. Most often, challenge is data. We're awash in data. Data's everywhere. However, AI can only be as effective as the information it's learning from, the quality of that data. When data is inconsistent or incomplete, or even spread across multiple systems, confidence in the recommendation starts to fade and just really get eroded. It's really especially true in retail, where critical information can live in many different places. Think about the merchandising systems or ERP platforms, point of sale data, CRM applications, supply chain solutions, these many different systems. And if you think about it, all these pieces need to work together to provide a complete picture of the business. And even when organizations solve the data problem, another question emerges. What happens to the insight? Too often, AI recommendations end up sitting in a dashboard in a report. They may look great. They may produce some great data, but the technology is producing, like I said, it's this valuable information. But if it's not connected to the actual workflows where decisions are being made, then that's where we run into these barriers within the technology. And then there's lastly these operational barriers. At the end of the day, people have to trust the recommendations before they're going to act on it. Think about all the people involved. You got merchants, planners, store operators. They may have years of experience making these decisions, but if they don't trust or don't understand where an AI recommendation came from, and they don't have confidence in the data behind it, well, they're likely to fall back into very familiar patterns and processes, things that they have found to work for them up until this point. And that leads to another challenge, which is speed. Even when AI identifies an opportunity, many organizations still rely on manual reviews or spreadsheets or approvals and meetings before an action can take place. And if you think about all those things happening, by the time a decision gets made, the opportunity may have already changed. And finally, there's the human side of transformation. New technology doesn't automatically change behavior. Employees need training. They need reinforcement of that training. Leadership needs through leadership and new ways of working. And teams need to understand how AI fits in their day-to-day responsibilities. Without that, adoption tends to just stall. It stops. And again, it goes back to that familiar pattern that they're used to. So when you take a step back, the takeaway is pretty clear. Retailers rarely struggle because AI can't generate useful recommendations. The real challenge is getting those recommendations translated into action. An important takeaway here is retail AI doesn't fail because models are inaccurate. It fails when organizations lack strategic alignment, reliable technology foundations, and operational readiness to turn AI recommendations into business actions. Umang, over to you.
So if we put these two slides together, and as Aaron highlighted, a clear pattern starts to emerge. On the one hand, we've seen that many retailers have embraced AI, but most initiatives remain stuck in isolated pilots with limited business impact. On the other hand, we've seen why that happens. And it's rarely because that AI model doesn't work. It's because organizations struggle with business alignment, fragmented technology, weak governance, disconnected workflows, and limited organizational readiness. So the question then becomes, how do you move beyond these challenges? How do you take AI from a collection of experiments to make it part of the way the business operates every day? So rather than thinking about AI as a series of individual projects, leading retailers are starting to treat AI as an enterprise capability that needs to be built and scaled through a structured journey. And that journey typically follows key 6 stages, from understanding where you are today to aligning AI with business priorities, building the right foundation, establishing governance, embedding AI into everyday workflows, and ultimately scaling it across the enterprise. So let me just walk you through what each of the stages look like. It starts with diagnose. So before launching any new initiatives, it is advisable to take a step back to understand AI readiness, assess the quality of your data, and identify the business opportunities that will create the greatest impact. The next step is to align. AI initiatives need to be tied to clear business goals. They have to be backed by leadership and owned by the right teams. Without that alignment, scaling becomes difficult. Then comes architect, building the right foundation by connecting business systems, designing a scalable AI and data architecture, and ensuring that environment is secure and ready for enterprise adoption. With the foundation in place, the organizations now need to govern. So that brings me to the fourth point, which says, that means that establishing clear oversight, managing risk, monitoring performance, and measuring business value throughout the journey. The fifth stage is execute. This is where AI moves beyond pilots and become part of the everyday operations, by embedding them into the business workflows, enabling users, and tracking early results. And finally, scale. Successful organizations don't stop after one or two use cases. It's not a one-off case. They continuously improve, extend AI across many business functions, and make it part of how decisions are made across the enterprise. So there's one common thread I like to point out here across all these stages is simple. Organizations that achieve real business impact don't treat AI as a series of isolated projects. So far, if you could just move to the next slide, Anish. Right. So far, we've talked about what it takes to embed AI into retail operations, from diagnosing, reading to scaling AI across the enterprise. The next question is, how do organizations actually execute that journey in a structured and a repeatable way? That's where a framework becomes very important. At QKS, we've translated those 6 stages into an enterprise transformation framework that combines methodology, governance, decision intelligence, and measurable deliverables. The objective here isn't simply to help organizations launch AI initiatives. It is to help them move from pilots to enterprise-wide business impact in a structured and measurable way. So let me briefly walk you through the framework. This framework brings across all the pieces together in a one structured transformation journey. So it starts with Illuminate, which talks about understanding where the organization stands today by assessing their readiness, identifying their capability gaps, and aligning stakeholders. Next comes is Design, where the understanding is turned into a clear transformation blueprint. So this includes the operating model, the governance, the technology architecture, and the execution priorities. Finally, we move to Ignite, is where the strategy becomes reality. All initiatives are executed, scaled across the business, and continuously measured for value. So supporting this entire journey are 7 capability pillars, from strategy and data to technology, people, governance, and value realization. The idea here is very simple. AI transformation succeeds only when all of these capabilities move together. At the center is our Spark intelligence layer, which combines market insights, benchmark, research, and design intelligence to help leaders make informed choices at every stage. So ultimately, this framework provides a structured path to move from AI ambition to measurable business impact. Anish, next slide. Okay, so this is kind of a little familiar slide. You must have seen it a couple of slides back when I talked about how the AI could be embedded. We talked about the 6 stages. So I'm taking this. This is where it came from. So the framework, what you just saw in the previous slide, defines the journey, but the platform helps organizations manage the journey. So rather than simply displaying dashboards, it's designed to answer the questions leaders ask every day. So just to sum up, what are we today? So, the diagnose stage provides a clear view of AI readiness and maturity. The question is, are we investing in the right priorities? The align and architect stages help connect business goals with the right roadmap. The question next comes is, are we executing responsibly? Governance and execution gives leaders visibility into risk. And finally, are we creating measurable business value? The scale stage tracks adoption, business outcomes, and overall transformation progress. The goal here isn't to provide more data. It is to provide decision intelligence that helps leaders make faster, better informed decisions throughout the AI transformation journey.
And something interesting here that I've seen many frameworks over the years, and many focus on assessment, some focus on some sort of strategy. However, very few focus on an advisory enabled execution. However, we believe there are 4 differentiators that matter inside of this and inside of what Umang was just outlining here. First is the peer intelligence. And organizations, they really need realistic comparisons. Second is vendor neutrality. Decisions should be based on evidence, not commercial agendas. Third is APAC-specific context, because region realities matter. Fourth is execution focus. Transformation succeeds through action, not presentations. And really, it's our objective is not create another AI rollout kit. Our objective is to really help organizations create measurable outcomes. And this framework has been shaped through collaboration with industry practitioners, enterprises, and the QKS community. So this feedback has been pouring in to really help shape what we've put together here. And a key differentiator of our framework is peer intelligence benchmarking, and which enables leadership teams to understand how their AI maturity, their readiness, and their transformation priorities compare against industry peers. So let's move to a real-world example here, Anish. And so far, we've talked about the challenges organizations face when they're trying to move from the AI pilots to a business impact. And let me bring to life, an example in the BFSI sector. And now there's this organization, it's a mid-sized financial institution, and they're looking to accelerate their AI adoption across their customer experience, operational efficiency, the risk decisioning, and digital engagement. Now, what's interesting is that the challenge wasn't a lack of AI activity. In fact, they already had several AI initiatives underway. The real issue was that the initiatives were happening in silos. We mentioned earlier, different teams adopting their AI pilots and putting things in place, but this led to the fact, like I mentioned earlier, leadership didn't have a clear view of the AI organizations, their maturity. Use cases weren't being prioritized consistently, and the organizations have become heavily dependent on external consulting support to move initiatives forward. And as a result, they were asking the same questions many other companies were asking today. Where should we invest? Which use cases should we scale? And how do we create a roadmap that's sustainable over the long term? And Umang, this is where having a structured transformation approach really makes a difference. Can you walk us through that?
Absolutely. And the first step, Aaron, wasn't to introduce another AI tool. It was to understand where the organization stood. Talk about engagement. The entire engagement started with a structured assessment of AI capabilities. We looked at governance, data readiness, and deployment maturity. That gave leadership a clear picture of both strengths and the gaps that needed attention. From there, the organization followed a structured transformation journey, starting with diagnosing the current state, aligning business priorities, building the right operating model, putting governance in place. Industry benchmarks also helped leadership understand how they compared with their peers and where they could create the greatest business value. One important aspect that I like to highlight here is that the organizations retained ownership of its AI roadmap. The goal wasn't to create a long-term dependence on consultants, but to build internal capability and transformation model that could sustain themselves. The results were significant. The team identified more than 20 AI use cases, prioritized 8 to 10 high-impact initiatives, reduced roadmap development time by up to 40%, identified quick wins within the first 3 to 6 months, and established a clear roadmap for enterprise-wide adoption over the next 12 to 24 months. So for me, the biggest takeaway, Aaron, was this example is that the technology wasn't the bottleneck. The organizations already had AI initiatives in its place. What unlocked business value was bringing together strategy, governance, prioritization, and execution in a more structured transformation journey.
Yeah, let's move on to another example here that's closer to home, and it's in retail. This mid-sized omni-channel retailers looking to improve their customer experience, their merchandising, supply chain operations, pricing, and store performance. A lot of different areas here they're looking to improve. And like many retailers, they weren't searching or starting from scratch. Actually, they had already invested in AI tools, some analytics, and several initiatives were already in place. But they noticed several challenges that were emerging as they tried to scale their AI efforts. They discovered that different teams were working on AI independently, which meant that, again, that leadership didn't have a clear picture of their AI maturity throughout the organization. Also, there wasn't a consistent way to prioritize use cases, which caused their technology to be fragmented across multiple tools and vendors. So while the investments were increasing, leadership was still asking a simple question: where will AI actually create the greatest business value? And Umang, this is exactly the type of situation we've been discussing throughout today's session. And so, how did they approach it?
Right, and Aaron, the first step was to understand where the retailers stood. It was not like I said for the BFSI example. It was not to add another tool. It was just to understand where the retailers stood. So what we started with the pre-diagnosis survey to assess AI capabilities, governance and deployment readiness, just to give leadership a clear perspective of it. Then we used the DAGGERS framework, moving through diagnose, align, architect, govern, execute, and scale to prioritize the right initiatives. As we did for the BFSI, we also used Spark Plus Intelligence, which brought together market benchmarks, peer insights, and design support, which was helping leadership focus on opportunities that would create the business impact. So an important part of this approach was that the retailer remained control of this entire transformation, and the outcomes came out very significant. We have some of them on the slides. The organization identified more than 25 AI use cases, so narrowed down to around 8 to 10 high impact initiatives. We will reduce roadmap development time of 30 to 40%. They identified quick wins that could be delivered within the first 3 to 6 months, and they were able to create a 12 to 24-month roadmap. So, the biggest lesson from this example is one we've discussed throughout today's webinars, that retailers didn't need more AI pilots. It needed a way to connect AI to business priorities, and then establish clear governance, focus on the initiatives that would actually, deliver measurable value. So back to you, Aaron.
Yeah, so let's focus on what these key questions that retail leaders must answer. And these are things that we want to challenge you with. What can you ask yourself and ask within your organization? And the context of this first question is around strategy. And this is a shift away from AI the way it was previously viewed. And many ask, what can AI do? That was back when AI was new. It was what I've called before the shiny new toy, and they just really didn't have an understanding of capabilities and was it a reliable tool for output. Now it's focused on how to best position AI within business operations. So inside that strategic direction, some key questions to ask is, how do we move from hundreds of AI experiments to a focused portfolio of initiatives that really deliver measurable P&L impact? Yes, AI experiments can still take place, but should be within the scope of true deliverables and not within the whim of anyone. That's within any team throughout the organization. Another question is, which AI use cases in merchandising, supply chain, and customer experience will deliver the highest ROI in the next 12 to 18 months? Meaning AI has a specific purpose with an expected measurable outcome. Then we should ask, how should we balance short-term quick wins with long-term transformative AI capabilities? Short-term wins provide trust in AI solutions so they can be expanded and foundationally matured to deliver long-term needs. And the last question, what is our target AI maturity level by the end of 2027? And how does it align with overall business strategy? This puts the onus on executives to embed AI into all areas of the business to ensure it's not a one-time effort, but really it's an ongoing top-line need for a competitive market position and for revenue-driving outcomes.
Right. So the second area today is really about how you scale the AI. So the first question is, what kind of operating model and governance do we need to move AI from pilots to something that's used across the business? Because if ownership isn't clear, even good AI projects struggle to grow. The second question that should be asked is, who should actually own AI? Should it sit with the central AI team, individual business teams, or a mix of both? More importantly, who's responsible for making sure it delivers results? The third question is, what's stopping us from moving beyond the pilot stage? Is it a technology issue, a data problem, a skills gap, or simply the teams aren't working together? And finally, do we have the right people and the right skills to scale AI? Technology, today technology alone isn't enough. People need to trust it and how to use it and make it part of their everyday work. So these may sound like simple questions, but they're often the difference between the AI pilot that stays small and the one that delivers real business value across the organization.
Yeah, once you've identified the strategic direction and you understand the scaling of your AI execution, this leads to the third area, which is really about the value realization and how we're going to govern our AI usage. And the first question here is, how will we rigorously measure and attribute true P&L impact, across revenue, margin, cost, capital efficiency from the AI initiatives? In other words, are we attaining the AI investment goals that were put in place? What needs to be adjusted to ensure shortfalls don't happen in the future? And this really shows the executive buy-in for AI as it has real funding and accountability. Next is what governance, risk, and ethical frameworks do we need to put in place for responsible AI at scale? In other words, how is AI being used within the company and by whom? Is our proprietary data safe from being leaked due to potentially irresponsible use of AI? These are major questions that require the creation of new, potentially new security policies or scrutiny of existing security policies that are enforced at all levels of the company and in all systems that are being used throughout the company. If not, there's this risk of it's enormous. It could damage revenues, company reputation, employee morale, and much more. Another question to consider is, what are the biggest execution risks in 2026 and how are we mitigating them? Are we deploying AI responsibly with the right policies and with the right people? Another risk is to consider is not using AI at all in certain areas or deploying AI initiatives too late. And then lastly, how do we create a repeatable framework for evaluating, scaling, and maybe sunsetting AI initiatives? Do we have detailed process documentation for each of the AI solutions? Do we have measurable outputs to indicate, a success or a failure? And do we have a means of measuring where or when an AI solution is no longer needed and maybe it should be replaced with something else? So as we're closing out this webinar for today, I'd like to challenge you or to think about one question here. Are we scaling AI or are we scaling pilots? Because the competitive advantage isn't having AI as most retailers, they already have it. The competitive advantage is turning that AI into better decisions, faster actions, and measurable business outcomes. Because ideally, because AI doesn't transform businesses, decisions ultimately do. And additionally, AI creates value when it's not when it's deployed, really, but it's when it's actually used. So I just really want to thank you for your time today, and I'll pass it over to Anish to see if we have any questions potentially from the audience.
Well, thanks, Aaron, and thanks, Umang, for taking us through the framework. And it was a pretty insightful session. And in fact, we've been noticing this quite often where, every organization that we talk to, every event that we attend to, we always hear the challenge that AI is causing them or how they're using AI to scale their enterprise. And I'm sure today's session has really helped them understand the responsible use of AI and how they could, how QKS could help them in their journey as well. Again, as you see in the screen today, we have something that is exclusive for all the attendees that are joining us live today. And we sincerely request all of you to take the free assessment so that you will get to know in firsthand what is it that QKS is talking about and how QKS's enterprise framework is going to help you in your journey. And as I wind up today's session, I would like to sincerely thank all of you for joining us and being a part of today's discussion. Today's conversation highlighted the success of AI in retail, and it is that no longer measured by the number of pilots launched, but rather it is measured by the ability to scale AI across merchandising, supply chain, customer experience, and store operations to deliver measurable business and financial outcomes. A special thanks to Umang and Aaron for taking us through that. Your guidance, especially on how we can or how retailers can move beyond experimentation to build AI capabilities and drive sustainable growth in PNL and PNL impact. If you haven't scanned your QR code yet that you see on your screen, we encourage you to participate in a complimentary AI readiness benchmark and take or book an advisory workshop where our experts will help you assess your AI maturity, identify capability gaps, and develop a practical roadmap for your enterprise AI transformation. With that, stay updated with the latest research, insights, and all our upcoming webinars, and do follow us on LinkedIn for more updates. We look forward to having you all in our future sessions. And once again, thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.